So I'm going to talk about this work that we're doing in the United States. I married a Yank. And it's very much similar to the kind of drivers that Liz talked about. And in fact, I now have known Liz for a few years. We've had the same kind of challenges. So in the United States, what we've been pushed pretty hard on is to start to document the results of science investments. That has a much shorter history in the US than it has in the UK. So in the United Kingdom, you've thought about these issues for a lot longer than we have. So this really started in mid-2005, I guess. Jack Marburger, who was the science advisor to President Bush, but a good guy, really good guy, he pointed out that he was being asked to justify the amount of science investments that were being made in different areas of science. How much do we spend in nanotech versus biotech versus economics, which is my discipline, or whatever. And he said, I have no theoretical or empirical basis to make those judgments. So he said, it's all being done on the basis of anecdote. I don't have a science of science policy. So what that did as a result was two things happened in the US. One was a federal interagency group got put together of the major science agencies. There are 17 science agencies. I co-chair that together with Bill Valdez from the Office of Science at the Department of Energy. And what we did was we took a look at the way in which science investments were being made across those agencies, and it's about $160 billion. So it's a fair chunk of change. And it was very manual, very seat of the pants across the agencies, quite heterogeneous decision making. And we also did a literature review to see what the state of the art was, and it left a fair bit to be desired as well. And I think all of that would, and at the same time, we also established the program that I run at NSF, which is called the Science of Science and Innovation Policy, which is trying to get really smart people to come in and think about how do you develop a stronger theoretical and empirical basis for funding. And that funds a lot of social scientists, but a lot of social science is also in conjunction with domain scientists. So when I joined the foundation in 2008, about 3 years ago now, we did a roadmap and we identified areas in which investments might be made to advance the science of science policy. And I think it would have been left there, except that in 2009, we had investments in the stimulus expenditure to try and jumpstart the economy. And the science agencies wanted a piece of the pie. I almost said the trough, but I shouldn't have said that. And they said, if you invest in science, it's going to create good jobs. And they started to talk about how many jobs it was going to support. But what became very quickly apparent was that we didn't have a empirical basis upon which to make that claim. And it turned out to be extraordinarily difficult for us to describe who is supported by science funding. So in other words, you might be able to say within each agency who the principal investigator is, what we call PIs, but it's almost impossible to document the graduate students, the undergraduate students, the postdocs, and so on. By the way, that's also true here in the UK, because as I said, when we did the eScience review, one of the things that we asked as the International Review Committee, we asked the UK agency, recipients of the eScience funding, to tell us who were the graduate students and the postdocs and so on. And we got lots of bits of Excel spreadsheets and pieces, parts, and clearly the poor old researchers had gone back and tried to pull the information together and tried to remember who the heck they'd supported. They had no clue where they went or what they did, but it was clearly a very manual exercise. So it's not just in the United States where we have a hard time doing this. So the first thing was obviously just to be able to say who are we supporting. But then we didn't want to get stuck with just saying how many jobs are supported as a result of the stimulus. And that's pretty much of a bean counting exercise. And what we wanted to do was to be a bit more proactive and be able to say not just who's supported, but really you're investing in science, as you quite eloquently said, because we think there are longer knock-on impacts, right? They're much broader impacts. And the reason we wanted to go there, even though the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, had said we just want to count the FTEs, we wanted to be proactive and say we want to go further than that. And the reason for that is there's a saying in Washington, you know, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we wanted to be at the table. So it's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask us to do is to document the results of $160 billion a year. And we're actually being pretty explicitly told to do this. We've had explicit directives to the heads of science agencies, and Congress is always on our case, and I think Liz made that point as well. How do you document what the results are of science versus investing in child health or other areas, right, or transportation or whatever? And you've got to be careful. You don't want to be cast in the line of an advocacy organization. This is the science of science policy. You may find that it makes more, you don't want to say I want to document the benefits of science investments. You want to document the results. So you want to have a scientific basis for this. It may be better to invest in child health. You want to come in with a very scientific basis for looking at this. But the third point, as we were thinking about this, is as you're doing the measurement, what you want to be careful is that you're capturing the right measures, because as anyone knows, you can't manage what you can't measure, but what you measure is what you get. Right? So if you push for publications, you're going to get what in economics we call SPUs, smallest publishable units. Right? So all your ideas get passed into tiny little units so that you can count those. And really what we want to do, both as science agencies and from the country's point of view, is you want to identify and foster good science. So the accounting exercise shouldn't be seen as an accounting exercise. It should be seen as a way in which we can, that can help us identify and foster the best science. So what we want to do is build a scientific basis for doing that. And I think Rob made a very nice appeal for recognizing that the way in which science is being done now has changed, and it varies across disciplines. As you know, social scientists, it's different from chemists and different from life scientists. And so what we want to do is we want to work with the community, the scientific community, so that they can tell us what the best way is to identify what good science is being done. Because really what we're interested in doing here is we're interested in identifying the creation, transmission, and adoption of knowledge. Right? That at its core is what we're about. So we want to capture that in different ways. And Rob was pointing out that the way in which that's done is very different now. And at least in the United States, a group of universities called Federal Demonstration Partnership, which works with science agencies, did a survey of scientists and found that they spend about 40% of their time in administration, you know, reporting, applying for grants and so on. And this is not a particularly productive way of scientists spending time. You know, you really want to have them doing science, not necessarily spending their time reporting. And again, as Rob pointed out, we now have a world in which almost all economic and scientific activity occurs electronically. So there's no reason to have fundamentally a 1970s way of collecting information on what scientists do. You may as well move into a 21st century set of technologies. And so that was what we were interested in doing, is reducing the burden on scientists. The problem is that the data to have a more scientific basis for describing science doesn't exist. And so this is the results of our interagency group's literature review. It's our road mapping exercise. And essentially, the data infrastructure in the science agencies is inadequate for decision making. And as far as I can tell, that appears to be true in many other countries as well. So what's the key challenge? Well, as I said, what we have traditionally been charged with doing is identifying and funding the best science. We haven't been charged with developing reporting systems. And those are fundamentally different activities. So essentially what science agencies are, and I've been in the bowels of several of them in the past 3 years, literally the bowels, almost literally. You know, what they are is proposal and award administration factories. Just think of them like that and you'll understand what science agencies do. Proposals come in, you throw capital, labor, energy, materials at them, awards come out, and then you have the financial management of the awards. Okay? So what's the problem with that? Well, one of the problems is, as I just highlighted, we don't have a systematic documentation of inputs. So you might have information on the principal investigator, although that varies across agencies. In some agencies, that doesn't even get retained on a systematic basis. You certainly don't in any agency, even the strongest agency, which is National Institutes of Health, you don't have systematic information on the postdocs and the undergraduates and graduate students. You don't have any systematic links between inputs and outputs. So you've got the grant processing system in one set of buckets, and those lovely reports that you spend so much time writing and sending in get read, manually processed by the program officer, and they're meant to stay in their head. They're typically in unstructured text format, they're not searchable, they're not linkable, and they're not put in any systematic way together with the grant that supported them. I don't need to tell you, I've been a PI on many, many grants. When you rely on manual reporting, you have to do it. Do you do it well? No. Most of the time you know that it's just going to disappear into a great big bucket in the sky, so you don't put a lot of energy into doing the reporting. You put down what you remember, which once a year, trying to remember what you did at the beginning of the 12-month is not particularly effective. And clearly, you heard Liz say, many of the results occur way beyond the period of the award. In fact, that's very much a reason for government investment in basic research. Because it's basic, it's a long way away from having its results. So you might be 15, 20, 30 years away from seeing the results, but the period of reporting might be 3 or 4 years. So because you don't have any systematic ability to capture outputs and outcomes beyond the period of the award, you're going to way understate the results of any investments. And then, of course, you have balkanized agency systems. So Liz again pointed out they went back manually to see for high-profile activities where the different sources of funding are. Well, it's exactly the same in the United States. We have 17 agencies, 17 different systems. There's no ability to say what NSF has funded, what NIH has funded, what the different science agencies have funded. So you have no sense of the overall amount of scientific investments in individuals or people. So trying to tease out the marginal impacts of different investments is hard enough within an agency system, and it's completely impossible across systems. So, you know, if we're going to be pushed so hard to describe the results of science investments, you should stand back and think about what would we like to see? Well, I'm a social scientist, so if you stand, and again, I come from labor economics, kind of the intersection of labor economics and IO, industrial organization. And to me, and to any social scientist looking at this process, to talk about the outcomes of awards makes absolutely no sense. Awards don't do anything. They're the intervention. What does things is the scientists and clusters of scientists. It's the human beings who do things, and clusters of those human beings. And the grants are the intervention. That's how you start to tease out a counterfactual, by the way, because you're looking at people who, at the activities of scientists who receive funding versus who don't receive funding, and start to tease out what the differences are. And then those people, those human beings, create products broadly defined, you know, scientific knowledge, economic products, training the future workforce, health and social outcomes. And so when you, once you think about that in this sense, you'll see that the grants administration infrastructure that is within science agencies isn't going to be able to tell you anything at all until you build those links to the human beings who were the ones who were doing the scientists and whose behavior you're trying to influence, trying to get them to study particular sets of problems. And it also tells you why looking at simply the products like the publications in the absence of understanding the human beings that lie behind those, the creation of that scientific knowledge, doesn't really inform you about what the relationship is between grant funding and the production of scientific knowledge. You need to have the human beings associated with it. On a similar note, what you also need is information about the infrastructure, the institutions within which the people are operating. So thinking about the results of physicists without thinking about investments in Large Hadron Colliders, or thinking about life scientists without thinking about biobanks, or thinking about the contributions of economists or social scientists without large-scale longitudinal data sets, it doesn't make sense. Or thinking about the structure of the labs and the environment within which they operate. So this is a description of the scientific enterprise. And what that then means, and many of you in the room will know this, I don't need to spell it out, is that the way in which we want to think about the data infrastructure should be changed substantially. So the grant system, any grant system you look at, it's a set of relational data sets, many of which don't update to each other. But what you're really interested in here is the dynamic interconnections, and this bucket here is particularly fluid because you get changing disciplines and people's interactions and so on. So what you really need is more of a graph-oriented database so you can dynamically update those links. Rather than, you need to be able to read from and read back to the native systems within each agency, but you want a different type of data infrastructure on top of that. So what we did was we stepped back and we said, okay, if we're going to build something, we're not going to build it in pieces, parts. We're going to think about how you build a 21st century system and try and set it up so that it minimizes the burden on the researcher. This is a picture of a researcher buried in paperwork. And we want to do it in collaboration with the scientific community. And the reason you want to make it voluntary and collaborative is, again, we're interested in funding and identifying the best science, So what you want to do is you want to have the scientific community engaged in that. In order to get the scientific community engaged in that, you have to produce something that has value to the scientist. And Cameron's going to talk a little bit about that later today. So you want to have something that creates value to the science agencies as well. The only way in which you do that is to make it voluntary. So this has achieved a lot of attention, obviously, at high levels of the government in the United States. So quite often I'll be talking to people in the White House, and they'll be saying stuff like, well, we should make this mandatory, it's really good. I'm like, absolutely not. But the last thing you want to do is to make it mandatory. Because if you make it so that it has value to both sides, when you send data back, and I'll give you some examples, people will start to say, that's wrong, I want to fix it, rather than being forced to fix things. So we started this up, and this is at light speed by federal government standards. I don't know what things are like here in the UK. It started between NIH and NSF. We signed the MOU June of last year. OMB gave us the go-ahead to move from pilot to full-scale mode in September, and we've had 85 research institutions join in a year's time. And we essentially have two parts. Part of it's driven by the ARA, the stimulus funding, who is doing science. And then the second thing is what are the results of science? Okay, so how did we do level one? So here's a little bit of a picture of the data flow, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I have time limits, so I don't want Rob to yell at me. I'm a sensitive flower, Rob. So essentially here we have is who are the scientists, and then over here, what are the results of their research? So that's the immediate thing. So we're in the walk, crawl, run stage, right? So we're at the crawling stage. So we're getting trying to get the intellectual capital, the scientific products, and then we'll move to getting more of the economic outcomes and other types of outcomes. We're basically baking a cake with the ingredients that are in the kitchen. Then we'll go shopping for new ingredients, but what I'm going to show you is what we're baking with current ingredients. And the notion here is we pull in this information in conjunction with the scientists, build an API layer, and enable people to develop their own tools and apps. The agencies and the community. Engage the community is fundamental to this, so that they themselves can say, you've got some bits right, you've got some bits wrong, here are the things that we think ought to be included, and to have some kind of community engagement. So I'm going to show you three things that we've been working on. So it's kind of soup to nuts. So the soup is, what are the scientists doing that they think has value? And we call that a science CV. So this is the scientist, expert network, and CV platform. So to automate their reporting. Almost every scientist has their CV on the web. They want to show it. They need to use the same information to report to 17 science agencies to do their annual and 10-year reviews. So why not just have a common platform that enables them to automate their reporting on a variety of different dimensions. The middle part of this is so that agencies themselves can describe what their investments have been, both within and across agencies, and make that transparent to the researcher, so that they can see what is here feeds into here. So it's not a black box inside the agency. And then here, because you're also interested in describing to the public and to Congress, to broader stakeholders, what's the money getting spent on and what are some outputs, have a place-based description. So this is a science-based description of what's being done. This is a place-based description of what's being done. So I'm going to show you some of those tools. So the basic idea is, how do you want to automate everything as much as possible. You don't want a PI to have to lift a pen unless it's absolutely necessary, unless it's just necessary to validate things. I'm going to give you a very specific way of how we do that for level 1. How could, when we did the eScience review, how could all that information have been captured on the postdocs and the graduate students and the undergraduate students and the support staff? How could that have been captured without the PIs having to fill in all those spreadsheets? God knows how much time it took them to do that. Well, the very logical way in which that could be done is all of that information exists within the financial systems of each university. In other words, every time a grant gets made or a contract gets made, a code gets created. And every dollar that gets charged to that code gets captured within the university for 2 reasons. One is money has to be there to make the payment. And then the second reason is accountants come through and check, right? So that's the insight here, is whenever funds hit, the institution creates an internal code, and it doesn't matter whether it comes from the Wellcome Trust or from RCU or particular aid or from wherever, there is a code that gets created. Then within the HR system, the human resource system of the university, everyone who gets paid by the project gets captured and their occupation gets captured. And you don't need to know their name. You can use their anonymized ID number, so there's no personally identifiable information that needs to be used on that. But you can capture that on a flow basis without to set a system like this up. It took about 45 hours for the typical institution to set it up once, and after that it's push button. Because all you need is 14 data elements, you write a script to pull it off the files, and it's automated. You actually want to do a little bit more than that, because what the universities were interested in is not just saying who are we supporting, but they want to document to their local community what the impact of their institution is on the locals, on the state, or nationally. How can they do that? Well, again, every time they buy rat cages or computer equipment or paper, there's a financial transaction. So you know the vendor, you know the zip code, and you know the industry of the vendor. You also want to be able to get across the collaborative nature of research and the notion that maybe a check gets written to, for example, Caltech, but Caltech collaborates with Colorado, University of Colorado. And so a sub-check gets sent to the University of Colorado. So you want to be able to document that. We've never been able to describe that before, either within research institutions or within funding agencies. It just looks like one big check goes to Caltech and then it disappears. But by being able to pass this stuff out, you can capture it on a flow basis. So what we're able to do automatically for all of the participating institutions, which actually by now is about 50% of the NSF and NIH portfolio, is we're able to capture the immediate results of the injection of federal dollars into the university every quarter, okay? And so this just passes it out, NIH, NSF, EPA, and DOE. A check goes to the research institution, some goes to payroll, some goes to the institutional support. That means the computer guys and the HR people and the people who actually make the university run. Some goes to vendors, and some goes to collaborating institutions. So what are you able to do? Well, think of it as an export industry for the state. So this is the State University of New York, Research Foundation, State University of New York. What you're able to do, this is second quarter of 2011, we're just processing third quarter of 2011. You could say how many active federal science awards there are, how many FTEs there are, automatically. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this was OMB was pushing on the FTEs that disadvantaged universities, because the nature of the scientific workforce is you have a lot of part-time graduate students, undergraduate students, and so on. So what we're able to pull up is actually how many individuals are supported, and you see it's a lot more than just the FTE count. So that gets across the notion that science sport is much broader, hits many more sons and daughters of the great state of New York than an FTE count gets. And then you're also able to automatically generate how many jobs are created or supported in other parts of the country. Again, because you have the occupational detail automatically generated, again, that's automatically in the HR system. You're also able to describe who is supported. Why does that matter? Well, Rush Holt, who is a congressman from New Jersey, who's a big supporter of ours, of science, he got lots of pushback when he was arguing for the stimulus package, as did Nancy Pelosi, because the line in Congress was, the science dollars just go to welfare queens in white lab coats. That's the line. So this is Congress. I'm sure that the UK Parliament's much more educated. But what you're able to show here, and this isn't, let me emphasize, all of this is completely auditable, transparent. It's from HR records, so there's no magic multipliers associated with this. What you're able to show here is that faculty are about 20% of science, of the occupation supported. Graduate students, undergraduate students, postdocs, and the others are the other 80%. And of course, what that means is not only are the people being supported now and being trained now, but they're being trained for the workforce of the future in the local area. So that's an important message. And then you're able to, as I said, document over time. Now, another thing that you can generate, and you can see why the universities are participating, because we generate these reports back to them every quarter, and they look at them, and then they see, does this make sense or not? What we're also able to show for SUNY is how many jobs are supported in other counties in the state because of the purchase of scientific equipment and so on, and how many jobs are supported in other parts of the country. So you're able to show there are jobs in Colorado, either because they've got a collaborating institution at the University of Colorado, or they're buying lab equipment or something there. There are jobs being created in Dallas and in Texas. Did I mention Texas is an important state? Florida, but that gives you a visual sense of the spread of science funding. But as I said, that's been counting. So what we're really interested in doing, if they really were just interested in the results of initial results of science spending, as we said when we were asked during the stimulus, the best way to actually support jobs is give the money to welfare recipients, because that's going to, they have a marginal propensity to consume a bigger than one, and that's going to be the way to generate jobs. But what you're really interested in doing here is what the argument that was made by the heads of the science agencies is that there's going to be important knock-on effects. So how are you going to describe that? I told you that we currently have no way of doing that in a systematic fashion. We tell a lot of anecdotes, but we don't have a systematic way of doing that. So how are we going to do that in a sensible way? So what we're interested in doing is building a data platform. I don't want you to think about it as a database, it's a platform that can link inputs and outputs, automated approaches, and leverage existing data. And of course, this is going to be hard to do. And so people say, oh, but this is really hard. Science is really complex. You know, we can't figure these things out. And this is from a community that cuts up brains and figures out how brains work, that decoded the human genome, that put the man on the moon. So it's really, doesn't really pass the love test when they said this is too hard, right? You get a bunch of smart people together and you can start answering these questions. So let's talk about ways in which you can start to describe what we're funding. So right now, we can't describe what scientific areas are being funded. We can tell you what programs, how much money is being spent by different programs, but the topic areas you can't capture in a systematic way. NIH has tried to do it by creating keywords. I don't need to tell you as scientists how difficult keywords are to adopt and that make sense across areas. So what we did was we decided to use cyber infrastructure tools to capture what kind of science is being funded. So what we did was we took 10 teams of some of the best computer scientists in the country, and we said spent 2 years getting them to look at the universe of NSF proposals from 2000 to 2011, the 15-page text documents, and say, how can you best summarize the information that's in these proposals? So what we ended up doing, we worked with about 50 program officers across the foundation and in other agencies. So this was a multi-agency effort. Took the NSF proposals, machine read them, used Bayesian algorithms, latent Dirichlet allocation. And Dave Newman is actually the guy who did the most promising work in this area. He's a David Bly student, for those of you who know about this stuff. And what it did is topic model. So what you do is you look at co-occurring patterns of co-occurring words, and you create buckets of words, bags of words. And this gives you a sense of how well this worked within NSF. The first layer, which is at quite a coarse level of granularity, clearly identified awards that were associated with polar programs, our Office of Polar Programs. At a deeper level of granularity, it automatically separated out Arctic and Antarctic funding. And so you could do all kinds of neat things with this, automatically, without a PI having to lift a pen. You can identify growth areas. So areas in which more proposals are being submitted, more awards are being made, areas in which the success rate, Mr. Nature, is higher in some areas than in others, because you look at proposals versus awards. So, it's showing you, where the panels think the hot areas are and how that's going. You can describe overlaps across agencies. So, for example, we topic model both NSF and NIH awards. And what you're able to see is there are a whole bunch of NSF-specific topics. NIH is much bigger than NSF. We hate them. No, we're not that. But there's the NIH topics, and then there's the overlap. And you can actually see which areas those are in. So that's using a more scientific basis to describe our science investments, because it's coming from the science descriptions themselves and pulling that information up at the most granular unit of analysis, which is the award level data. Now you can do the same kind of thing with economic outcomes, and we cooked with the ingredients that were in the kitchen. I recognize that patents are not necessarily the best, but they are a readily available source of data, and they're quite powerful in many dimensions. And what we, to some extent, want to do on this is to push people to say, that's wrong, and then you say, yeah, you're right, we've only got part of it. Help us identify data that would capture what your science does better. So what we did in the CISIP program, we invested heavily in the NBER patent database. And so what we did was, patent databases are transaction-level databases, each patent, but they have the names of the individuals, and you can tie that back to subsets of scientists. So the name disambiguation issue is non-trivial, but that's the work that was done. So what we're doing, we use this to describe scientists, to describe science. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through how we do this. And remember I said there were 3 sets of areas in which we were going to do this. The portfolio characterization and management, what science are we investing in? the portfolio reporting, describing to the public what we're doing, and this Science CV, Science Expert Network CV, so that the researcher themselves can correct the record and say the topics should be modified and so on. And the key thing here is make it open and transparent and automated. So you don't want the PIs to lift the finger any more than they have to, and you want whatever decisions are being made to be, and the information that is being used to be open. And the reason that you want it to be open and transparent is that that then also gives the researcher the incentive to provide useful and current information. It doesn't just disappear into a black hole somewhere. And then, as I said, facilitate the building of apps. You're going to see some apps that we built, but the notion here is to stimulate the community to develop other approaches. So every time that we're building something, of course, you want to say, who cares about what's being built? Because you want everyone to gain from what's being produced. So for agencies, they want to know what's being funded in which areas. Expertise locator, who's being funded in which topics. This is actually something I'm fairly passionate about, because if you look to see how expertise is identified within agencies now, it's heavily manual. It's in some researcher, in a program director's head. When they're trying to put a workshop together, they walk down the hall and they say, who's good in this area? And that's how you pull workshops, that's how you pull panels together. And that's an important part of how the scientific community develops networks and finds out about new funding opportunities. But it's all in a program director's head. So it tends to perpetuate an old boys network. What the Brazilians found when they developed a national platform was a democratization of research and a democratization of funding, because then you had a more scientific way of finding experts than the heavily manual approach that's currently used. Useful for researchers. Right now, how do you find out what research opportunities there are? Well, you have to know about them. Or you have to be willing to read through program solicitations and try and figure out what works. To have a more scientific way, you can just see, I'm doing research in topic area X. What programs have funded research in topic area X, and have that automatically generated? And expertise located for VPs for research, vice presidents for research. They're interested in their institutional strengths and weaknesses. And then the guy from SUNY, for example, if he's putting a bid together in response to a particular solicitation, like right now, the White House is pushing pretty hard on bioeconomy, finding out researchers who are doing work in bioeconomy, whatever that is, right? So let me show you the tool that we built. How am I doing this? Here we go. So when I showed you the worker information, that was built off 14 data elements. This is built off 6. And these 6 can be translated across each agency. So the 6 data element, and it doesn't matter whether it's in Europe or in the United States. The 6 data elements are the text of the proposal, the PI, or the principal researchers, the dollar amount, the program element code, period of performance, and the institution of the researcher. So this is very, very alpha, right? So we worked with this with the chemistry directorate or division. Inside the agency, we can look at awards versus declines versus proposed. So you've got a much better sense of, what the growth areas are in the different topics. But I'm going to show you this live. So this is going off and hitting against the entire NSF database. And we're going to do it for 3 or 4 years. Let's hope this works. I've never done it on a Mac before. Okay, so what this does is this automatically categorizes things by topic area. And I'm just going to pull off a particular thing. Is there a way of shrinking this? Can I...
Command minus.
Command minus. Yeah. Ah, there we go. Got it. Perfect. Okay. I'm used to my IBM, but not really. Machine. So I can look at my portfolio in terms of the dollar amounts and the quantity of the proposals in different areas. And then what I'm able to do is as I pick specific topics. Now remember, these are generated by at the award level. On the right-hand side, up pops the dashboard that describes what's being done. And it's going to show both by quantity and by quality, not quality, by quantity and by dollar amount. That's an economist's Freudian slip. And then the other divisions that have funded work in these areas. And what I'm able to do here is then automatically pull up information about what proposals there are in these topics. Now, I was pulling off the primary topic, but obviously the topics, awards are not single topics, right? An award will quite often have multiple areas. You might have the scientific discipline that's being used to think about it, like economics or chemistry. Then you might have how far along it is between basic and applied. You might have the particular subject at question, climate change, let's say, or diabetes, whatever. So you get the subject area, or you might have multiple disciplines that are coming together, so you get a true measure of disciplinarity, not made up measure of interdisciplinarity. So you can see then at a glance the program element code and the funding source, and then what you're able to do here is pull up the abstracts. Now the point here is the PI can see this is what the program officer, as we build this out, the idea here is PI can see this is what the program officer is working with. And we're building this out now, the patent and the publication information. You can also see for particular researchers, this is public information, I'm not going inside the website, this is all. But you can see this particular person is the one who's done the research in this topic area. You can see what they've been funded to do, what the average size of the award is, their collaborators, which helps you identify, later on I'm sure that the researcher community will start building apps associated with it. And if you want to, you can start, again, developing the dashboard on the right-hand side. You can also find institutions. An important thing is not just who are we funding, but who are we not funding? Where are my gaps? So you can sort by institution. It's going to take a little bit of time to pop up, I guess. So you can change everything up here, obviously, and you can use the expertise locator. I'm not going to go into it in too much time because I'm conscious. But then the other thing that you might want to do, the last piece, so remember I was doing soup to nuts. So the input is the CV information, the portfolio reviewer for the agencies, and then what does the public see? Well, the public doesn't care about buckets of science. What the public cares about is a place-based view, because they want to find out what research is being done in my local area and how's it being used. And so I was out in Colorado. You can, this is all alpha. We're still working on this. But so I was out in Colorado. So I'm going to use Colorado as an example. I was out there last week. And you can hover over and you can see NIH and NSF investments. And you can slide over by year. And I'm going to zoom into Colorado. And there you can immediately see what dollar amounts of investments were going in these different areas. And you can zoom in on particular parts of this. And how do I go down? Yeah. No, I want to come over here and go down. Sorry to be so incompetent. But then what pops up is, you can then drill down and find out more about, this is the particular grant that came in, and you can sort by different categories and search. And I didn't go down and search, but you can also search by topic. So again, it's at the most granular, it's tied to the award level. So what the public wants to know is who's doing research in, I don't know, diabetes in my local area, and what do I learn about it? Okay, so here we go. So that shows you investments, but what people are also, the public, Congress is interested in is the outputs. So what we have here is publications, patent, and patent applications. Now I know that that's limited. I'm baking with what was in the kitchen, but as we build out the science CV part, we'll have many more ingredients to cook with. But the point here is we didn't want to burden any researchers. So let's take a look at the patents. And so we're going to go to Colorado again, and you can see these are the total patents, and then these that are linked to NIH and NSF-funded research. So I can zoom in here and look at what's funded by NIH, and then I can see automatically who has got patents that are tied to NIH-funded research, and that is pulled automatically off the patent database. I can find, and you see the citation within 2 degrees, Liz associated with that a little bit more in her discussion. And then what I can do is I can also, this is driving me crazy, I can also find out the research institutions, and if I could go down, I could show you the technology clusters, or the technology classification, so you could search for the different technologies. And, but I can also search here because I've got the technology information here, and then if I'm interested in more detail, it clicks through directly to the US patent database. Okay. So all of that is built off essentially 6 data elements within the agencies, and then external data sources like the patent database. And as Rob pointed out, this is with cyber tools, essentially. So how do we automatically generate richer information? Well, you go back to the people who are doing the science, and the fact that what scientists want, and Cameron was very vocal on this, actually I think I met you through the Nature piece that said let's make science metrics more scientific, is scientists want to show what research is being done, and they have a lot of the information already existing on their websites. So why not make that, this is a fake screenshot by the way, but why not have that be the core ingredient where the scientist controls that information, and that's what gets fed into it. So that leads me to the last piece, which is building an automated CV system, which we call the Science Expert Network and CV Platform. And so the notion here is it's better for scientists because they get their input into the reporting at the most granular level, what they're doing, and reduce the scientific burden because do one CV and use that for reporting to all the agencies as well as within their institutions. It's better for agencies. The data are going to be much higher quality. You're going to be able to go beyond the period of the award, and structured data, and better for the public because then the public sees what the scientists are up to. Would like to point out we're not starting from scratch, right? So there's been a lot of work that's been done in Brazil. The Vivo system in the United States that's been used with existing institutions. There's work being done here with Eurocris and Sarif that we can leverage. And so the notion here is building a collaborative pilot. So remember, you don't want to go behind researchers' backs. You want this to be fully open and transparent and engage the community in this. So we're right now building that collaborative platform. We're working with the FDP, the Federal Demonstration Partnership, which is 120 research institutions, and asking the community to step up to the plate and help us design the system. And in fact, yesterday, I was talking to the European Parliament because the notion here is let's make this a global activity. And so here's the a rough sense of what comes in is you want automated pull-in from existing sources. It would be a whole lot easier. You see it, I think here we have ORCID showing up. It would be made a lot easier to auto-populate CVs if you weren't doing it on a name basis, but by doing it on a persistent researcher ID. And we're working with the researcher community to see what researcher IDs would work. ORCID is a strong and important contender on this. And then all that the researcher has to do is just say, this is me. Instead of manually putting the information in 17 different times, they're confronted with a list of pieces of information, and then the human being validates it, and that's what feeds into the CV platform. I think I've said enough. Then the potentials for describing networks and so on get a lot stronger. So our basic goals here is we want to have a scientific field. We want to make this as scientific as possible. Build a common empirical infrastructure and a common scientific infrastructure. So it's not a bunch of feds sitting around the table developing metrics just randomly without any sense of the behavioral underpinnings of it. Build a scientist at the core, have a behavioral understanding of how science investments work their way through, and have a common scientific infrastructure as well as an empirical.
Thank you very much, Julia.
Thank you.